Welcome, everyone. This is the last session of the Organizational Strength series with Mike Martin. I hope you've enjoyed the series so far, and we'll get started. Thanks, Mike.
All right, no problem. All right, good morning, everybody. This is our last session. It's been great to be with you so far. It's been an interesting time out there, as I'm sure most of you are experiencing. I mean, on one hand, it was great to really resurrect a lot of the lessons and kind of define them for you that I've used over the years and continue to use now relative to leading in a crisis, turning around companies. I've also been doing a fair amount of coaching on it, coaching of leaders again, and so it's very timely, these topics. So today, what we're going to do is I thought I would first go through. I just wanted to highlight a little bit of a review of the series. And of course, not all the points that we went over, but some of the points that I really wanted to make sure that we hit home. And then I'll proceed forward into the building a plan. So those of you who've been able to be with me the entire series, you're going to recognize a couple of these slides, but I really wanted to come back to this one. It was from our first session, that the keys to turnarounds, or at least let's call it the key to really leading through a crisis or enacting dynamic change in your organization in a relatively short time period, require three things. The first is strong leadership. When I say strong leadership, I think I'm referencing what we talked about before in terms of passionate leadership. You know, you being the type of leader that is sold on your own plan, your own vision. It needs strong leadership in terms of our ability to take action and to see our way through times of crisis and continue to inspire our people. It also takes strong leadership in terms of many times the decisions that we need to make are really not popular in the short term or not easy to make in the short term, but they're really for our benefit in the long term. And that requires a strength. I think the last one is really picking up on what we talked about this last session, which was humility. And my opinion, albeit it's my opinion, that humility is one of those things that oftentimes is confused with weakness or is viewed as weak. But I really believe that it requires an internal strength to be able to find these balance between being humble enough to accept my own faults, to really look at myself from a growth perspective, to be reflective on my own performance, but also be willing to step into making those hard choices. All right, so that's strong leadership. The second is it takes systemic design change. What I mean by that is that we fundamentally need to change things relative to our organizational structure, perhaps our product and service mix, changes to the way that we lead and that we interact, but that it can't be on the surface. We really underlyingly need to make a systemic change to our fundamentals if we're not only going to survive the short term, but if we're going to really build in strength and growth into the future. Finally, speed of execution. This one may seem like the easiest one, but it's definitely the hardest one to enact. Just had a conversation with a senior leader this morning, and it came back to that again. You know, how quickly are we stepping into making the decisions that we need to make, but viewing execution and action as the hallmark of what we do, and understanding that what we put off till tomorrow that we really should do today really doesn't make us any better tomorrow. It really rarely enhances our decision making by waiting even longer and putting it off, but it just can make us look weaker in our organization's eyes and in my people's eyes. So those are the three things that we really need to focus on in times like this. Second, what is winning? For those of you who were part of our motivational, when I talked about motivating people during times like this, really the people side of it, I really believe that this vision of this is what we're really here to do is important, as I want to get people on board with me, but as I'm also thinking about how I'm going to build my plan and how I'm going to execute on my plan. And these were three factors that we discussed that were part of how do I draw people into this and how do I motivate them to want to be a part of the vision that I have and want to roll up their sleeves and do the tough work and really want to be part of what we're building for the future. Number one, my definition of winning for myself, the organization, and for my people is being part of a team that accomplishes great things. Number two, it's saving a company, a division, a unit, whatever that, organization is that you're really focused on, that supports our friends, our family, and our community. It's really understanding that our ability to win and come together during this effort is supporting others. And then finally is a real personal sense of having pride in the work that I do, the contribution that I make, and who I'm working for. So the reason I brought these points up again is that oftentimes, and you'll see that when we talk about the plan itself, the plan is short term, tactical. It feels very much digging into some of the weeds of the things that I need to accomplish so that we can survive. But while I'm doing that, I really need to continue to connect people with this bigger purpose of what this winning means. The only way I'm going to get through the short-term pain of making tough decisions and bringing people along is if I can continue to point them to, align them around, and focus on our true purpose, that bigger picture that we're going to experience. Next, walking the leadership tightrope. I was having a discussion with a leader this past week, and this came up in our humility section, but I really believe that being a leader in a crisis, in a turnaround situation, is some of the toughest and can be some of the most rewarding work that you do. But number one, it really requires me to be prepared to make the tough decisions that no one wants to make. Nobody enjoys being in a situation like this. Oftentimes, what I'm looking at in terms of my plan and my options to proceed, I don't like any of the decisions I have in front of me, and I still need to step into that and make those tough choices. And while I'm doing that, I'm really at all times trying to balance an approach to being a leader in this environment where I'm constantly inspiring people and challenging them and empowering them to take action, but at the same time, holding them to a very high standard of accountability for their own results. I've got to have both of those if we're really going to engage people in this, have them share ownership of this situation, but also accomplish those goals that we have. So that's really what it's requiring from me as a leader. Okay, so those were just three things I wanted us to take away from our series. There's a lot more detail in it. You can get access to the previous sessions to review it, but those are some of the most important things that I find myself continuing to coach on and assisting leaders each and every day on. So now let's convert over, let's switch gears for a second and talk about the plan, the plan itself that you're building. All right, there are 4 parts, excuse me, to building a plan. Number one was really understanding the current state of the organization, the current state of the business. I'm not going to go into a ton of that today. There was a lot of work that I did to understand how to analyze the financials, operational state of the business. I had a process whereby I evaluated all leaders, their capabilities, and also their willingness to contribute to the overall goals of the organization. But what was very important is before I got down to the specifics of what the plan was going to be and how I focused that plan, I really needed to, through an interaction of data and financials, being out there with the people in the organization, and also speaking with stakeholders and customers, I needed to be very clear as to what I felt were the opportunities of the organization, but most importantly, some of the big weaknesses, that we had that I needed to fix going forward. This part of the work was always what, I felt like I had an advantage on. I had the ability to be able to read people very well and quickly in terms of who was on the team, who was not, who really wanted to be a part of it, and who was working against us. And then secondly, the ability to go out and really look at the organization and understand those key points of weakness. That was something I relied on heavily, and I still do in each organization that I go into. And that was all part of the information that went into building the plan. Next, I designed the actual plan itself. That plan had 3 components to it, always. It had a financial component, a cultural component, and an entrepreneurial component. I'm going to go into those in just a second. The plan was designed with some specifics to it that I'm going to go through in a second. But once I understood the current state, then I'm going to get very focused on what the actual plan is and how we're going to execute on it. Next, I needed to align the leadership team. I was very specific and purposeful about how I brought my leadership team into this, how I discussed and how I really developed their understanding of what it meant to lead in this new environment, what we were committing to as leaders. That was the alignment was part of setting our follow-up system as leaders, how we would follow up on the plan, how we would ensure that we were executing to the plan and that we were doing it in the right way. Mm-hmm. And then finally, I built into my plan how we would do all of these things on a daily basis. What would winning on a daily basis look like? So it was really critical, since time was of the essence, since morale was always something that vacillated and could be a struggle on any given day. It was important that I took, what might be considered a little bit of a longer term plan, but enabled everyone to understand each and every day if we had a great day. And I use that theme a lot, and you've heard that from me. But that was definitely, all these 4 things were a part of building this actionable plan. All right, now a couple of things to keep in mind when building the plan. Number 1 is to complete it quickly. When it came to understanding the current state, even if I didn't know the organization, I had never been in the industry before. I really had no background to leverage, years of experience. I had to do my analysis quickly. I gave myself 2 to 4 weeks, no more. 2 to 4 weeks. I pushed myself really hard to collect everything I could, to get out with my people, to solicit ideas and response and, quite frankly, complaints, to connect with the customers. But I wanted all that collection done between 2 and 4 weeks. Okay. Once I had that, I gave myself a weekend to make the whole plan. That's it. A weekend. This might seem really counterintuitive. It may seem kind of crazy. Some of this may just be experience that it's hard to convey why I did that. But in essence, what I found is the longer you spent time trying to craft a plan, typically the less you understood about the contents of the plan. You just kept adding things and it wasn't focused. Further, the more complicated or the more time that you spent on it, it tended to get more complicated. It tended to use word, language, and a communication style that didn't resonate with people. And finally, what I found over time was delaying the planning process or really stretching it out didn't actually improve the quality. It just burned some of my timeline. So I wanted to complete it quickly. Second was focus on the short term. The plan is really geared to be a 6 to 12 month plan. I've seen them go up to a year. I would say the first 6 months are most critical. And when I looked at the plan, and we'll go through it with the components of the plan, I broke that up in terms of what my focus was each quarter. Okay, but really 6 to 12 months was it. And 6 months I wanted to be really solid on when it came to my planning. Keep it simple. I wanted to have this be very simple. The plan itself was less about all of the details of the plan and more I used it as a communication tool and a sales tool. Okay, so this plan was living, it was out there, and it became part of our narrative and our dialogue about who we were, but more importantly, who we were going to be and how we were going to get there. Last, I was very specific on certain elements of it. So I was having this conversation with a leader, rather than saying what I need to do is improve cost of goods, for example, on my products, I would take that and I would boil that down to product line. I would boil that down to actual material, tie it to specific vendors. So the more that I could make our plan specific, the easier it was for me to know what winning was on a daily basis, but also the easier it was for me to solicit support from my people, okay? To really get to them and say, okay, how are we doing this? How is it going? And what do you have that you can contribute in terms of ideas or improvements to help us accomplish that? So those were 4 things that I kept in mind when I was doing it. Now let's look at the contents of the plan. I think the biggest thing to understand about this is that there's no one size fits all to the plan itself. I have components. I said financial, cultural, and entrepreneurial. I'm going to talk about all three of those components. But given your situation and your scenario, where you're at right now, you may not be in a situation where you're, in fear of having the business or a division or something go away because it's that big of a crisis. Maybe it's just reestablishing strength or dealing with these market situations we're in. The nature of your plan may change a bit. What I chose to do was to give you some thoughts on the elements of the plan as I built them when I am saving a company, okay, just as a point of reference. So first was the financial portion of it. The financial portion of the plan is the first 90 days when I'm turning something around. It needs to be done within the first 90 days. It's typically aligned to survival for us. And it was critical that there were certain things we did to stabilize, survive, and really build our fundamentals for the future. Number one was take a cash is king approach. There's really a lot to how you do this, but in essence, I wanted people to really understand and my leadership to understand that cash flow was the lifeblood of our business. Our ability to, receive in actual cash and use it to pay out and to spread it to survive was really important. I wanted them to talk in terms of daily cash on hand, how we were raising cash, how we were spending cash. I wanted that orientation to understand that profit and loss and balance sheet are, accounting abstractions that can be useful, but cash is what we spend and cash is how we survive. Second, as unpopular as it was, I've never seen a turnaround situation that didn't need some right sizing. These are incredibly difficult things if you have to go through them. And I recommend you get support, from somebody who's gone through them if you have to. But this is the idea that if we are no longer the size or the nature of the organization that we used to be, but we're still running the same size as we used to be, I have some tough decisions I have to make in my financial plan. I always look to clean up the balance sheet. This is where, the ratio of assets to liabilities, this is where I'm looking at our underlying fundamentals and I'm looking at whether or not those assets and liabilities are lined up well, whether they're really working for me, and I wanted to clean that up. And finally, right in the initial financial plan, I am looking to eliminate products or services that are unprofitable, or in essence, I am devoting energy to, but they're really not making an appropriate contribution back. Okay, so this is really that first 90 days of my plan where I'm looking at all the financial fundamentals that are going to ensure whether or not we get to stay open tomorrow or next week or next month, but also, how we're going to proceed forward to be able to build strength. Okay. Second was cultural. I talked about it a bit in this. I've talked about it a bit in this series in terms of what morale is like in a situation like this or in times of crisis, the fear that can go along with it, potentially just the way that we work together as leaders or as teams really might be one of the things that contributed to some of our current situations, and I needed to reverse that. Some of the things I focused on were aligning to daily goals and objectives, really taking people out of this orientation of looking at organizational metrics and results as something outside of themselves, but getting it down to where we lived at that team and individual level every day in terms of the action we took and the goals that we had. I organized for success. That's really some of the organizational changes that I made relative to some of the right sizing I may have to do, some of the core business, which we'll get to that I'm going after. I may need to organize ourselves and our around that new way I'm going. I also really wanted to organize for team-based action. I was really looking to install at that point a structure and an accountability that had everyone personally accountable for what they're contributing, but also realizing that they're part of a team and they're stronger together as a team. Culturally, I had very clear expectations for leaders, how we would lead, how we would support our people, what did our follow-up look like, what did our daily rhythm of leadership activities look like, how did we prioritize actions, and improvements. So I really, really clarified those and got my leadership team aligned. That was part of the aligning my leadership team. And then when I was assessing or really trying to develop that culture, I was looking to have those leaders leading in a different way to set that tone for those teams and those individuals to contribute. But I wanted a bias for action. It was really not so much that every action we would take would be perfect, but I wanted people clear that it was about taking action. So those were the cultural things. And I defined how we were going to do each of these as part of our plan. Finally I called it entrepreneurial. This is really to combat this idea that we can just cost cut our way to success. That if we just lean ourselves out, if we just eliminate cost and overhead, that somehow we can have success. And it really doesn't work that way. I would say that where financially I'm trying to stabilize in the first 90 days, as soon as I get a little bit of stability and I've got my feet under me, I'm going over to that entrepreneurial side. I'm really taking that analysis of what our core business is, where we're really good, where we have an advantage. I'm doing analysis of what contribution they're making, those businesses are making to profitability. I'm looking at my industry and I'm looking at the market as to where I feel like we can have some effect or we can bring in and grow. And what I'm doing in this phase is understanding something really clearly, is that growth and new sales solve a lot of problems. They solve a lot of problems. They can fill in gaps where my plan or some of my stabilization hasn't worked out as well as I hoped it would be. And there is a real, when you're restructuring and you're really retooling for the future, there is a sense of loss. People experience a loss, things, they remember what it was like potentially, or maybe they're thinking it'll never go back, or they're fearful for some of the change. And growth or new opportunities for the organization really helps inspire hope. So I had a plan relative to understanding that really growth was our number one goal. That was my job, is to ensure that not only were we working on the culture, but we were aggressively trying to grow. And I had a plan for really strengthening how we would build sales teams, how we would really, bring in new business. That was part of my plan as well. So if you look at these three things, I'm just about out of time, but if you look at these three things, financial would have been the first 90 days. Entrepreneurial comes right after that. Cultural is day one and it's going. So if you could picture it, it's like, the financial and operational are up here, but cultural is what I'm developing and looking to mature as I go, over that 6-month period or the 12-month period that I had. Okay. All right. So where do you go with this? Number one, obviously, I think all this is culminating in having a plan, really understanding what your vision is, what you're trying to accomplish as an organization, and building a plan that has some of the hallmarks in it that we talked about. I think that's a logical next step from this. Maybe not a logical next step, but one that I feel very passionate about is getting some help. Okay. When you live this life, that you either find yourself in right now where it seems like the rug's been pulled out from under you, or the market has changed, or just the fundamentals that you used to rely on are no longer there. It can be very solitary at times. You can start to question your own abilities, question your own plan. And I found that I really valued help in two different ways. Number one, I needed somebody that I could talk to and be really transparent about my feelings, my fears, the problems I had with my plan, struggles that I was having, somebody who was not connected to the organization, somebody that I could trust, and somebody where I had an opportunity to have a relationship where I could be really honest about where I was going, and how I was going to get there. Okay. Now, the second source of help was really getting expertise from people who had already been there, So that was whether or not it was help in terms of understanding my market and the drivers of it, whether or not it was understanding some of the fundamentals of the industry that I was in a specific turnaround, and I need to understand that. Or most importantly, did I have mentorship and coaching from somebody who had been through a turnaround environment, the situation that I was going through successfully before? Did I have somebody that I could look to and really help me think through my process, help me really understand whether or not, poke holes in my plan, and really challenge me to grow, but to challenge my thinking and challenge my planning. Okay, so that was really important. It is really, I said earlier, it is really what I've been doing quite a bit of in the last month to two, is connecting with people and coaching from the standpoint of helping them think through their plan, poking holes in some of it, maybe challenging their thinking when they might not be stretching themselves enough. Some of it has been really listening to leaders as they share with me, hey, I can't talk to anybody about this, but I really want to tell you what's been happening and get your thoughts on it. And so what I know that worked for me was having that outlet and really having guidance from people who were good at what they did and were willing to help me. But I'm also seeing it that I'm being able to pay that forward now to others in that same way. And I have gotten the feedback back the same way I experienced, like, wow, it was great to be able to talk about it. It was great to be able to review my plan. I was thinking that I was specific enough here, but you challenged my thinking and you made it even more real in terms of how I was going to accomplish this with my people. Okay, so on that is the end of the series. I see a couple of questions here that I'll address in just a minute. If you want to reach out, please do to get some coaching on this, or if you're midway through a plan or you've been wondering how to bring all these things together, really send me an email or give me a call, and if I can help you with that, I'd be more than happy to. So we've got a couple of questions. Do you recommend these same steps for government organizations? Yeah, I do, actually. The content of the plan and how I build the plan are going to be different, but it's no different relative to the same idea that, the industry I'm in may have a bit of a different plan. The market itself or the underlying fundamentals of where the organization may adjust the plan. So there isn't a one size fit all, but this idea that we look at stabilizing our environment, we look at focusing on the culture and how we're going to grow into our near future is the same. How do you help people understand the balance of right sizing and growth as the two bookends of your model? Boy, that's a great question. That's a tough one. I mean, in my experience, I was relentlessly honest about sharing with people why we had to make the decisions that we had to make. I put everything out there. I made it very clear. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's the data we have. Here's the profit and loss. I was very open to say, can you see what I see? Which is right now, our burn rate is going to have us have to close the doors in the next 60 days, in the next 90 days, or whatever the scenario was. I shared that with people. And, number one, to test my own thinking, but the other is, truthfully speaking, I don't have a hidden agenda. If you can make the math something that it isn't, let me know. Now, the other thing that I did is that I really believed that if we had to right size, we needed to not right size over time. We needed to right size at one time, explain and be open and honest about everything, and then make an extreme commitment to never have to do that again. And I never did after that. So, for example, if we knew that certain divisions were going away or product lines were not selling and we had to adjust, the size of our organization and the locations and people and everything, I was really honest about that. I really helped everybody. I viewed it as our responsibility to help everyone find good work, and other opportunities. And I relentlessly helped them do that. But then I made a commitment to them. If we execute on these things, I will be the first one in the morning, the last one at night, and we will not do this again. And knock on wood, I never did again. But it was allowing us to really do what we needed to do up front, and then really focusing on everything about the message was, how did we need to grow? How did we need to grow? All right. So those are the two questions that I have. Really appreciate number one, Shingo, for putting this on and hosting it. Mary, thanks, and thanks to everybody at Shingo. I mean, it was awesome to get an opportunity to discuss this stuff and just share with you my experience over all these years doing it. And if it helped you, I really hope it did. And they've got another. I know Shingo's got an event coming up on the 4th. I would definitely suggest all you guys participate in that. It's got some great speakers, and I'll be in there too. And what I'm going to do is it's embrace scientific thinking, and I'm gonna take a little bit of this flavor, talk a little bit about how we did that in times like this. So maybe another way to share this with you. Okay.
Thanks, Mike, so much for your time doing this. We really appreciate it. And thanks for everyone for attending. And if you need to get a hold of Mike, please do so. His contact information is on the screen, and we'll send it out to everybody in an email as well.